Hi everyone. I wanted to talk to you today about positive and negative space. So how many of you recognize this image? On the left-hand side, you might notice there are two black faces facing toward each other. And then when you look to the right image, you might notice that now there are two white faces facing toward each other. Or you might notice in the left image there is a white vase in the center. And in the right image, you might notice there's a black vase in the center. Take a moment and choose one of these images. What I'd like you to do is look at it carefully and notice the faces. Keep looking at the faces. Now notice the vase in the center. Now notice the faces again, and then the vase. Continue going back and forth, noticing one and the other. What do you see? Vases or faces? This image has become a well-known illusion that plays with how we see positive and negative space. Positive space is usually the area of interest. It's literally the object that takes up space in the picture. Negative space is usually around the area of interest. It's the space between the objects in the picture. So for example, if you were drawing a picture of a person and their hands were on their hips, the negative space would be the triangle created next to their body. That space, that open air, would be negative. Their arm or their torso would be considered positive. For example, if you were drawing the chair in this image on the right-hand side, you might originally decide to start looking at the positive space by outlining the chair, perhaps. Another way you could consider starting to draw this chair might be drawing those white rectangles in the back and focusing on those instead. When you draw, you want to be looking at both the positive and the negative spaces and how they work together. So how do you see in this way? Well, when you look at an object in real life, it helps to try to imagine all the colors and values flattened out into black and white. Then you want to try to identify those spaces around the object. What do they look like? Try focusing on them and not the actual object. So for example, if you were looking at a stool like this, our first instinct might be to look at the legs, the spindles, the seat of the stool. Start looking at those white squares. Do you see those in between the legs, underneath the seat? There's some white rectangles. It helps to kind of notice both of those, the black areas and the white areas. And then when you start to actually draw, I want you to start thinking that you are only seeing the negative spaces. This is a really tough thing to do, and it does take a lot of practice. I often tell my students in Art Foundation that when you are learning to draw in this way, you are literally learning how to see the world in a different way. So I have some images here that are just playing with positive and negative space, and they're kind of fun to look at. So this is a movie poster. You may notice the positive space might be the back of someone's head and their shoulders, and then that negative space is the hands. In this image, we have the positive spaces, or the positive objects that would take up room would be the flowers or the leaves or the stems of these plants. What do you see in the negative space? If you see a face right away, that means you're looking at both positive and negative. In this one, you might notice the legs that are black have a more traditionally male shoe or masculine type of shoe. If you look at the white spaces, the white legs have a more traditionally female or high-heeled shoe. And then this one is just kind of fun. I don't know if any of you have ever noticed in the FedEx logo, but there's actually a hidden negative shape in there. Do you see it? I'll give you a second to look around. I'll give you a hint. It's in the E and the X. If you notice the white arrow in between the E and the X, congratulations, you are starting to look at those negative spaces a little bit more closely. Let's look at a few more. So this is a poster for another movie. You might notice that it's a map of England and Ireland and Scotland, but if you look in the negative shape, you might see a werewolf in there. In this one, we have a positive shape that looks like Snow White, her black hair, red lips, a red bow, but in the negative space, if you look at the outline in her hair, right along her profile where her hair would meet her face, you see the outline of Sherlock Holmes. You see a detective outline there. And this is one of my favorite ones. This is a logo for a golf club. So the first thing I notice is a black silhouetted, looks like person playing golf, holding a golf club over their shoulder, and it looks like there's kind of a track of rectangles getting narrower and narrower. But another way you could look at this is if you look at the golfer, the space between his arm and his shoulder is an eye, his elbow is a nose, and then you start to see a profile of a face, and then that track of rectangles is actually the back of a Spartan helmet. So this is one of my favorite ones. I think it's a very clever logo. You can actually create positive and negative shapes when you create three-dimensional artwork. For example, these are some vases. Just like you saw before, there's an actual white vase or a white column. But if you look at those black and negative spaces, you see two faces looking at each other. If you like optical illusions like this, M.C. Escher is a really great artist to check out. A lot of his work has positive and negative shapes morphing into each other. For example, here you see some black geese, or I think those are geese, maybe a duck. And it's kind of morphing with the negative shapes into a white fish down into the water. This one has a black profile outline of looks like a male or a man with short hair, kind of a large nose playing a saxophone. The very bottom is his pant leg and his foot, or you might see the face of a woman. So she has an eye. Right by the saxophone player's chin would be one of her eyes. The other black shape that's kind of hanging out in space is her other eye, and then you see the silhouette kind of her nose, and her lips is where the saxophone player's hand would be. This is a really cool movie poster. If you look at the image on the left, you'll see the black positive shape is Batman. And then if you look at that same image flipped upside down, the yellow, what was the negative shape before, now is the positive, and I believe that is the penguin. Those of you who are into Batman can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the penguin. This is actually a picture that I took on a package that I saw in the office one time, and I thought, oh, what a clever logo. So you probably see the white arrows all pointing out to 4 different corners. Do you see the black arrows pointing inward? So there's white arrows pointing out and black arrows pointing in. Take a second and kind of let your eyes play with this a little. See the black arrows, see the white arrows, see the black arrows, see the white arrows. This is another logo for a tea company called Teavana. This is one where you could look at this logo and see a person. That dot at the top could be their head. The two sort of brownish swoop shapes could be their arms holding a cup of tea, and then their legs in kind of a crisscross position. Or you could look at this as someone's face. So the sides of their hair, that kind of half circle in the middle would be their mouth, and maybe they have a scarf around their neck. Here's another example of some 3-dimensional shapes, these kind of cool pillars or columns. But now our negative shapes are human beings, the outlines of some profiles of some humans. This was actually a campaign by the Humane Society a few years ago I found online. I'm going to let you guys look at this for just a moment. Do you identify the negative shapes in each of these? And what is the negative shape? You'll see on the left it's a dog. On the top right you've got a rabbit, and in the bottom right you've got a cat. And this is a really effective marketing and advertising tool. There's a subliminal message here about, you have these relationships between people and they're clearly connecting, your families, they're in love. But then in the center of all of this is an animal or a pet. And it would make sense that the Humane Society especially would want to use an image like this to kind of imply that, your family isn't complete unless you have an animal or a pet in your home with you. Here's another really beautiful one. It's a painting. If you look at the far left of this image, you'll see kind of a bridge in the water and these archways. If you look at those archways, they move and move and move and morph to the right, eventually turning into actually a positive shape, which is a ship. So I hope this is fun for you. I hope it's interesting to kind of see in a different way. We are going to be practicing working with positive and negative shapes later this week. So one of the things that I will have you do is practice drawing some faces and vases. The advice I'm going to give you when we practice this is when you draw two faces looking at each other, you actually want to try to look at the vase in the center and try to not think about yourself actually drawing a face. Our brains tend to have a lot of ideas about what we think faces are supposed to look like, and this actually makes this exercise more difficult. You'll also want to draw slowly. If you're rushing, it means you're not looking very carefully. And I want to ask you to challenge yourself this week. So if you find this exercise easy, you may want to consider drawing more elaborate faces. If you want to get a little bit of practice with this before we do it together in class, feel free to start practicing this. So draw a face profile that's facing to the right, and then draw another one facing to the left. And you should have that sort of symmetrical vase in the middle, and see how it goes for you. The other thing we'll be trying also with positive and negative shapes this week is drawing some animals. So I have some pictures for you that you'll be getting with your sketchbook in a couple days. I'll have you look at the positive shape first. So for example, in this image, the black elephant on the left would be the positive shape. So you would practice kind of just doing the outline of an animal like that. And then in the other exercise, I'm going to have you look at the negative shape. So instead of actually thinking of yourself as outlining an elephant, I want you to think about outlining those black shapes that have the yellow arrows in them. So there's a kind of interesting organic black shape in the top left corner, and then in the top right corner, and the bottom right, and then in the bottom left as well. Please shoot me an email, shoot me a text through Google Voice, in any way that you can. Communicate with me and let me know if you have any questions, any comments about this. I hope this has been a fun presentation for you to look at. I've got 3 more advertisements on here, so if you want to pause this video and take a moment and look at these 3 ads, they're pretty cool. They all, again, play with that idea of positive and negative shapes. And especially if you find this really interesting and think that you might want to do a career someday in advertising or marketing, this is a really common tool for people who work in advertising and marketing to kind of get people's attention and to create cool, interesting logos that draw attention to them. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and I'm super excited to see you in class.